All right. What was one historical event do you remember when growing up, and why?
Okay. Well, one of the most, well, there's actually quite a few, but the one that sticks out in my mind the most would be actually the assassination of John Kennedy. I was a sophomore in high school in 1963.
And why was that one of the most historical events?
Well, we actually helped with the campaign. I was part of the campaign, even though I was in high school. And the fact that he was Catholic, and that had a lot to do with it, because I actually went to a Catholic school, parochial school. And the fact that it was really unsettling that something like that could actually happen. I mean, it was just unbelievable when it did occur. I mean, somebody could assassinate someone, especially a president. I mean, and he was so young too, and really never had really much of a chance to accomplish a whole lot.
And could you compare that event to any event now later in life, or is that still the biggest historical event?
Well, to me, it was really not. The other one was the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that was '62. Um, the only other big one would be when I graduated in '65. There was the big buildup. Johnson had the big buildup in Vietnam, so I graduated in '65 and actually got to spend a summer after graduation and was drafted to go into the service in '66. That was kind of traumatic, but yeah.
And what was Vietnam like?
Vietnam, that was a good question. Um, it was definitely different. I mean, we landed in Cameron Bay. It had white sand beaches, and it was just very picturesque. The water was beautiful, but as soon as you got off the plane, it was just the smell of the place. I mean, it's very hard to explain. It's just Vietnam has a different type of atmosphere. I mean, the different smells just kind of hit you right in the face, and the heat. I mean, I would do it over if I had to do it over again. I mean, the guys I was with when we got stationed up in the 25th Infantry Division were great guys, and I'd do it over again. It wouldn't be an issue with that.
Alrighty,
But
were there any good stories there?
yeah, 10 offensive. I was there for the 10 offensive. I was supposed to rotate and go back home in March of 1968, and then of course the 10 offensive broke out in January of that year. That was kind of a scary thing. It was different. I mean, I don't
And
think anybody really expected it.
what was
And
the food like there?
food was all right. It was mess hall. I mean, it was okay. It was nothing fantastic. Um, we flew. I was in an aviation battalion, gunship company,
Mm-hmm.
so we flew a lot of night missions. We actually had a night cook, a night baker. His name was Walter Jasinski, and he was amazing. He made the best freaking donuts in the world. He was really good. I mean, the food was all right. I mean, it was nothing to write home about. We ate in the village a lot, but it was all right.
And do you guys listen to music over there at all, or?
Oh yeah. We listened to listen to the music. Yeah, popular music in the '60s. Yeah,
What were
definitely.
some big names that you
Big
listened to?
names, Peter, Paul, and Mary. For that, we listened to a lot of them. Chicago was another big one. Um, that's probably about it. I mean, there was so much music. I can't even remember half the individuals that participated in that. But Peter, Paul, and Mary was a big one. And a lot of guys like country and western too. I mean, the barracks I was in, they called it a hooch. It was I think there's 12 guys in that particular per hooch. These guys, they were big in the country and western, so they Grand Ole Opry. they loved that. They loved that music, which is okay. Wasn't
Yeah.
a problem.
And was life different after coming back from Vietnam, or was it the same?
It was different. It wasn't quite the same. It's really strange because you came back, you were there, and when you came back, it was like you were just thrown back into society, and it was it wasn't like there wasn't any adjustment period. You had to make your own adjustment period. I mean, it was difficult at first. It was like going from hot water to cold water, and there was no in between. But you just had to take your time. A lot of people couldn't adjust to that. I mean, I've had a lot of friends that actually had a lot of problems with that. I mean, there's just no way they could adjust to it. I mean, it was difficult for a lot of people. I had a cousin, and he had a lot of emotional problems because of that. Yeah.
What was one of the biggest movies back then that kids would like to see today?
Wow. Well, Sound of Music was the biggie. That was a big one back then. I don't know if kids now want to go see it or not, but yeah, Sound of Music was a big one. That was the most popular one that I remember. In fact, I remember seeing that one prior to actually going into basic training. That was a big movie. Of course, we had movies when I was in Nam too. We actually had I think it was every other night we actually had movies. We had an open type theater, and but they weren't new movies. I mean, last one I got to see there was never did to get to finish seeing. It was called Alfred Hitchcock and the Torn Curtain, and because we got mortared while the movie was going on, so I only saw the first 10 minutes of it, and that was it. So I've never seen a movie after that. But yeah, I think Sound of Music was the biggie. Yeah, that was the most popular one.
Any good war movies that represent Vietnam well compared to others?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people go with Platoon. And actually, Platoon is a rendition of the 25th Infantry Division. Oliver Stone actually was there the same years I was there in the 25th. That's in the southern part of Vietnam, not very far from Saigon. I would think the movie that most projects exactly how basic training is and exactly how Vietnam was is Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket, all right.
Full Metal Jacket, yep.
What was a big television show back then that people like to watch?
Back then, a lot of Barney Miller was a big one. It was a series on TV. I think Star Trek just started coming into its own. I remember watching a couple episodes before I got shipped out over into Vietnam. So, that was actually starting to be a halfway a decent series.
And what was, were there like any specific role models that a lot of kids looked up to? Or?
Yeah, I mean, John Kennedy was for one. Robert Kennedy was another. Martin Luther King. They were all role models. In fact, some of the actors back then too. Kirk Douglas, Cary Grant. I mean, those were all a lot of people. Enjoyed. A lot of guys enjoyed those actors. I mean, John Wayne was another biggie. Now he was a very popular role model for a lot of people. John Wayne. I personally, I liked Lyndon Johnson. I think he's the guy who sent me to Vietnam, but I thought he was a good president. I was kind of really crushed when he didn't actually run for a second term. I mean, I was there when he announced that he wasn't going to run. It was on TV. I was really disappointed, but yeah, he was kind of a role model. I thought he was a very good president. Most people will disagree with that, but hey, I got my own opinion.
Alrighty. Were there any like memorabilia, collectibles, or games that you were into?
Back then, there wasn't. I tell you, it was completely different than it is now. Most kids were just, most guys were just riding bikes and stuff. I don't think none of the video, and nothing like that. I mean, pinball was a biggie. Bowling was a biggie. Was a big sport. Other than the sports like baseball and football, collecting. Probably, I would say the big thing was stamps and coins back then, and actually trains started coming into fashion during the late 60s and early 70s. Yeah.
All right. What was school like as a Catholic school compared to public school?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay. I went 11 years to parochial school. So the final year I didn't go was because they consolidated. It was a very small school. We probably had about 135 students in the high school, 4 grades, 12 through 9th. They consolidated with Madonna in Weird, West Virginia. I didn't go. I went to Fallsby High. Parochial schools were probably, I'm not sure if they're the same now as they were before, but when I went the last year I went to public school, I really wished I had gone for the other 3. They offered so much more, because the way parochials, well, when I was in school, the way it worked was they were nuns taught. There were nuns that actually taught the classes. We did have a few teachers that weren't nuns. In fact, one was Richard Walensky. Had him for 8th grade. He was our 9th grade freshman teacher. He was great. He was fantastic. He was the best teacher I've ever had. When that particular school I went to, it was like if you grasped what they were teaching, and very few people did, that was great. If you couldn't grasp it, or you were kind of middle of the road, too bad. They just left you be. They didn't take the time to say, well, let's do this over until you get it right. That's not the way it worked, which was sad.
Yeah.
And I could see the difference between going to a public school for that 1 year. It was completely different. I mean, completely different. It was just like night and day. And in fact, like I said, when I had someone who wasn't a nun teaching us, Mr. Walensky, I mean, he would sit down he would go over the subject until you got it, and he explained it really well. They just didn't have I guess the nuns just didn't have any patience. I mean, if you were a bright student and you caught on, that was wonderful, and they would go on after that. I mean, the other students were, well, hey, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't, which was kind of sad. In my opinion, that was kind of sad. Yep.
Overall, so we're gonna wrap it up. How is back then compared to now? Like, what are a lot of things that have changed?
Well, okay, we wore uniforms in school. Are we talking about school?
Just overall.
Well, overall, well, I would say probably the attitude of people have changed a lot. I mean, when I was growing up, we didn't lock doors. Now you have to lock doors. Everybody knew everybody. I don't know. It's just like, it's not as friendly an atmosphere with neighbors and stuff. And especially with everything that's going on. And a lot of that's due to the fact that you have that information right now. I mean, you get information about everything via the web, Twitter, Facebook. We didn't have that back then. We had newspapers. That was in radio. And you got TV. I mean, that was it.
Alrighty. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.